chatting briefly about the market. And as I always recommend, try to look at your MLS screen every day. Let's see what we got here. MLS up. There we go. Let's see. There we go. Okay, everybody can see this, you know, on your dashboard, you should always have a little Market Watch segment, and you can move these around, but you'll have a Market Watch segment. If you enable the market stats.
I'm gonna try to go on my phone. I can't hear anything.
So when you log in, this should look like somewhat like your front page on MLS. You'll notice down the side here, there's a number of links, okay? And those links can have a lot, some of them are pretty useful stuff, but always look at your Market Watch every day in the morning. I look at it for the last 7 days, and then every Tuesday morning, I publish the results for the entire MLS, for Collier County and Lee County, so you can see what's happening. But you know, it's been a pretty consistent pattern. This is all of Southwest Florida MLS. 679 new listings, 618 sales, 777 on your pending. Your pending is those things that are under contract and should close in the next 30 to 45 days on average. There might be a few that take longer, but that's your forward look. That pendings are a little higher than sales. That means that we're on a little bit of a rise in terms of what's happening out into the future. And look at then your price decrease is 708. So if you add the listings 679 to the price decreases 708, you got like 13, almost 1,400 new opportunities that have come into the market. And that's where you can focus in, if you like, and isolate, you can set up a search for a neighborhood that you're looking for a buyer, or for a listing that you have. And you can take a look and let MLS notify you anytime something changes in the market, a new listing, a price reduction, a pending, or a sale. So if you're looking in a particular area for a customer, don't be afraid to set up a search. Let that search notify your email every morning. And if you want to drill down to see, you know, what prices have decreased, these are all the 700. This says 753 in the last 7 days, and you can sort that by sub-condo name, and you can start to zero in on a particular neighborhood. Okay, and this is going to show you, you know, overall what some of the price increases are. There's a 6%er, but most of them 2, 3, 4%. And but if there's 153 of them, that's more than the new listings that have come out in the last week. So part of the shift in the market is the changing in terms of the market becoming more stable. Still not a balanced market by any stretch of the imagination, but we've gone from 1 month or less than 1 month of inventory out to 3 months. And if 6 months is considered a balanced market, then we're headed toward a balanced market. And we are seeing some stabilization in the pricing. And that's evidenced by the number of price decreases and the number of back on markets. This is another thing you want to look at. If you have a particular neighborhood that you're looking at, again, these can be sorted by the area, and every one of these was back on the market. So there's 149 of them in the last 7 days. And if you want to take a look, let's add a field in here for days on market. Insert column. So we just added this field to our repertoire there, and now you can sort it by days on market. You can see that we have to go out to probably number 65. So 65 of the 65 of the 149 were on the market less than 20 days, 3 weeks, right? So you can see that there's still quite a bit of turnover activity in the market. And if you have a buyer, it's a lot better environment for buyers. So if you were working with a buyer last year that got totally frustrated by making offers and not being able to get an accepted contract, this is a great time to reach back out to that buyer and say, hey, look, prices are moderating. I wouldn't say they're coming way down, but they're moderating. And financing contracts are starting to become accepted. So those that felt like, well, I could only pay cash and I don't want to pay way over the list price for the home, so I'm out, they may be coming back in the market. The other thing you have is you have foreign tourism, countries that were shut down and countries that wouldn't allow visitations to the United States. Those have opened up. Canada's opened up. And so the market is changing in terms of the mix of the market. But what's really happening is by having these classes and showing you different ways to find out about the market, is the market has gone from kind of a chance-based low skill market to a skill-based market. So you need to be sharing your story with your database and sharing your story with customers and letting them know that the market is improving. And if you're a seller, obviously you may not be able to shoot for the moon like you could have 6 months or a year ago, but the market, remember, I say it every week, the market you sell in is the market you buy in. So if you have a seller that doesn't want to reduce their price because they're like, well, I still think I can get this, then you have to go to their motivation and say, well, what are your plans? And if your plans are they want to buy something else, chances are they're not going to pay that top dollar for that home that they want to move to. So try to make sure you keep current in your knowledge of the market and that you're able to share that in a few seconds with somebody that says, how's the market? Because remember, what are they seeing on TV? They're seeing, prices falling. They're seeing, low inventory. A lot of that isn't true. And I like the idea of saying, well, I'm not in a buyer's market or a seller's market. I'm in a winner's market. Because if you work with me, you work with somebody that's knowledgeable about the market, can give you with great information on how to make a decision on what the market value is, and I can help you negotiate the best deal. So moving back into our realm is more skill-based, more information, and better result for the customer. So that's my market update. Any questions? Feel free to unmute and ask any questions you want. If not, let's move on to the next segment here. Stop share, there we go. Okay. Friday, we had a lunch and learn at NABOR, and myself and a real estate attorney and another experienced realtor put on a presentation on current market issues, current market practices, and I'd like to share that with you today. We had, I don't know, 125 people in the room and those bunch of people on Facebook. And I don't know whether any of you were on that Facebook page or in the audience, but I'm going to go ahead and go through this a little bit here because there's some good information in there. I guess I better share it with you before I do it. There we go. Everybody, I guess everybody can see that. So this was a session that we put on, and I'd like to go ahead and share it with you. It was pretty well received, and it had a lot of good ideas in it. So I'm going to go ahead and run through this with you. And if you have any questions, there's only 4 or 5 beyond. So please feel free to unmute and ask a question. So even though the market has started to calm down a lot, it's still a jungle out there. There still is a very short amount of inventory out there, so that when you're working with a buyer, you may not have a lot of options for them. And although we've seen prices moderate, we're still seeing the list to sell ratios in the 90s, 99, 98.9. So we're still seeing in the market contracts going to coming to fruition at or near the list price. So there's still a lot of competition, and we're going to try to talk to you a little bit about how you can best represent your customer, whether you have a sell side or the buy side. So we're going to talk about setting expectations, which is the most important thing you can do when you start working with a customer. We'll talk about multiple offers and how to handle them. We'll talk about escalation clauses. For those of you that haven't used an escalation clause, we have one for the brokerage, and they've been used fairly effectively in the highly competitive markets. Now, even though the market has calmed down a little bit, there's still a lot of multiple offer situations. They may not be 15 offers, but there's still 3, 4, 5, and 6. So the techniques for dealing with them are still very similar. Backup offers. I've had occasion to suggest to a couple of our agents that were bitterly disappointed because they lost out on an offer to another offer. And they were like, well, I guess we didn't go high enough. I guess we didn't do this, we didn't do that. But if your buyer is still very interested in the property, put in a backup offer. As you saw, there were 150 homes that went back on the market. 70 of them were in less than 20 days. There's still a lot of as-is contracts being written, people going through due diligence. Maybe they haven't visited the property. Maybe they're wanting to inspect it and they're finding things they don't like. But there's still, I noticed that Florida Realtors published a stat last week that 16% of all contracts are not completing, not closing. And that's up from 12% a year ago. So, you know, you figure that the chances are pretty good if your buyer really likes the house and didn't get the original contract accepted, your odds are pretty good that while you're looking around for something else, that you may get a backup offer to work for you. So we'll talk about that. Summarize it. Again, your questions can come in at any time. Just raise your hand or just unmute and ask the question. So as we said, it's still a jungle out there. There's still not a lot of supply. There's still, prices are still pretty high relative to what they were a couple of years ago. And some of that is here to stay. When Naples was visited heavily by people that were from states and areas that were shut down and Florida was open for business, a lot of people came to Naples. And a lot of people could work from home and said, wow, this is a great place to live. And all of a sudden we became a much more of a destination, a sought out destination. And we started being compared more to other properties around the country that had similar amenities and similar wide open spaces. And people started discovering that we have 2 Ritz-Carltons, we have an art museum, we have our own Philharmonic Orchestra, and we have wonderful beaches. So those discoveries really fueled our sales for 18 months there, and still really are. But what happened in that 18-month period was prices rose pretty significantly. And that was because of the competition, obviously, but also because of the values that were being experienced when we compared ourselves to other parts of the country. So there's still quite a bit of competition out there, still quite a bit of angst in the market. And so you have to be prepared. So what's our first suggestion? Be calm and respectful. It's not your house. And you know, as we move more into a skill-based market, the chances are you're going to be dealing with people with more experience, and you're going to be dealing with people that, because they got the listing, they were more knowledgeable, they were more experienced, and they're going to probably be a little bit easier to work with. But always be calm, always be respectful of your fellow agent. You never know when you're going to do another deal with them, or whether you're going to need their help presenting your offer to their seller, and going to bat for you. So remember the code of ethics. Remember that we take a pledge, and every couple of years we go through ethics training. And yours truly is an ethics instructor, because I think sometimes we forget the fact that we took an oath to professionalism, respect for our fellow realtors, respect for the customers, the general public. And we sometimes forget that when supply runs thin, tempers run thin, so forth and so on. So one of the things that I've noticed, I do the compliance for all your contracts. One of the things that I've noticed is occasionally, more than I would like to see it, you see that the offer was tendered to a seller, and the seller countered it or signed it and sent it back. And lo and behold, the seller's signature comes back after the time period you've given the seller a chance to respond. It could have been a counter offer, but remember, there's a time for acceptance and delivery. It gets augmented by two days for counter offers, but that time period is the time period in which the contract is valid. So if you send over to a listing agent on behalf of a buyer a contract, and you say that it expires tomorrow night, August 23rd at 5 p.m., and the seller sends it back to you on August 24th or 25th signed, is it a valid contract? Not really. If there's buyer remorse or seller remorse during the contract to close cycle, and the buyer's unhappy and wants out, takes it to their friendly local real estate attorney, they're going to say, this contract was not signed timely in the period of time when the offer was valid. So a couple things here. Number one, give people time to respond when you send an offer over for a buyer, because you don't know whether that buyer is on vacation, out of the country, whatever. I always recommend, and you'll hear me say this many times during the presentation, always call the listing agent before you submit an offer, because you want to find out information on behalf of your customer. So I'll call up Kyle and I'll say, hey Kyle, this is Jeff Jones. I'm wanting to submit an offer on your listing on 123 Main Street, and I just wondered, do you have time for a couple quick questions? Sure. Okay. So are there any other offers on the property? Okay. So you have two. Can you tell me, if they're where they are relative to list price? Okay. So they're both well over list price. Great. Can you tell me if your sellers would be willing to consider a financed offer. Yes, okay, we have two of them that have been submitted that are financed. Okay, great. And is there anything that your seller would like to see in that offer that has, that beyond the price and beyond the closing date? Well, my seller would like a longer close because he needs to find a place to live and he needs to, as a matter of fact, my seller would like to stay on for 3 months after closing so that they can wrap up everything, get it all sorted out and move out. Okay, great. Thank you very much, Kyle. I appreciate the information. Now you go back to your buyer and say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I talked to the listing agent, Kyle, and here's what he told me. Now your buyers may say, well, the market's crashing. It's on the market for 550. I'm gonna offer 475. Well, okay, that's great, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer. I certainly understand you're wanting to get a great deal. However, Kyle told me that he has 3 offers and they're all over list price. So I'm not certain that submitting an offer below list price at this time would be very productive for you. Also, they said that Kyle said that they will accept a financed offer and that they have a couple of them out of the 3 that are financing. So we now know that. And finally, the seller is wondering if they could stay on after the closing for 60 days or 90 days so that they could get everything packed up and move out. And so your buyers are like, well, this is August. We're not coming down until October. So that would be okay with us. So now by talking to the listing agent and getting that information, now I can pass on useful information to my buyers so that when we create the offer, that we're going to be competitive. We're going to present an offer to the other, to Kyle that maybe his buyers would like, or his sellers, would like. So please build it into your routine when you're representing a buyer and the buyer's excited and wants to place to write an offer, that you call the listing agent and get as much information as you can. Some listing agents will be less forthcoming than others, but in many cases, they would rather talk to you and tell you what's going on than have you submit a frivolous offer that really has no chance from the time you submit it. Okay, now another area that in the MLS, there's always remarks, confidential remarks down at the bottom of the listing page. And many times they will contain information in there that the listing agent has put in there to help you to write your offer. They may say, we've got multiple offers, so we are going to make a decision on Monday, the 29th at 5 o'clock. So that remark tells you that if you put an offer in that expires before then, your offer may well expire, but the seller that will help you to discover things in your contract, major exclusions, when the seller is going to make a decision, things like that can help you to write your contract and not write a contract that isn't going to give you your customer the best chance of getting approval. So always look at those remarks before you write the contract to make sure there's nothing in there that would change the offer you're going to make. So you are entitled to proof that your offer was presented. Was added to the Code of Ethics a couple of years ago. And as a listing agent, once your seller's made a decision, it's a great idea to communicate back to all the other offers or all the other agents their offer was not accepted, and also proof that you presented the offer to them. So you'll notice on the NABOR contract, and I believe FAR-BAR, it's on the FAR-BAR, it's on a separate worksheet in the FAR-BAR, but in the NABOR contract, we've added space to say seller rejects buyer's offer and can sign it and put a date in there. And the reason that's there is if you just send that back to the other side, then that's proof that your seller has signed the fact that he's looked at your offer and hasn't accepted it. many cases, agents feel like when they submit an offer, especially if the listing agent had both sides of one of the transactions, that their offer wasn't properly presented, and you're entitled to that. So make sure that you understand that on both sides. So this is just a copy of a letter that I got out of I think it was on a Facebook page back in the, but this is just a little note to the that you can send out to all the people that didn't have their offer accepted, expressing your gratitude, expressing their appreciation for their professionalism. And also you might, with obviously the permission of the seller, you might be able to share some information about what happened. Now, this was probably back to the days when people were getting tremendous number of offers. I think that's settled down a little bit, but at least you're going to share back with the buyer why their offer wasn't accepted. And ultimately, here's what that does. Number one, that's a listing agent telling you that your offer was presented. And number two, it's giving the buyer's agent a little bit of information about the quality of the offers. And so oftentimes when there's a scarcity of inventory in a neighborhood and a buyer makes an offer and doesn't get it, and then they make another offer and they don't get it, now they're starting to look back at you, the agent, like, what's wrong with you? Are you not putting our best foot forward? Are you not doing the job? But if you're sharing this information back to your buyer, and the buyer's now going to start saying, oh, okay, our offer was just list price. There were 12 over list. So we weren't, and there were 13 of them were over 334,000. So interestingly enough, don't worry about all the details here. This was just an example, but the point is that if you're a listing agent and you're in a multiple offer situation, it's a great idea for you to send. I don't do a lot of transactions, but I had one that I was representing a friend last year, and we had 17 offers, and 3 or 4 of them dropped out in the process. But we were able to print a spreadsheet together, and then when the seller picked an offer that she wanted, I sent offers to every one of the other. I sent a personal letter back to every one of the other buyer's agents, thanking them for their professionalism, telling them a little bit about what, the quality of the offer that was accepted. And believe me, I had some nice emails back from agents that have been in the business a long time saying, hey, thank you for sharing that information. So again, this is part of being respectful to other realtors, part of sharing the information, a part of giving the qualities of the offer that was accepted on that property. You guys feel free to chime in with any questions. I guess I can. Okay. All right, so one of the most important things you can do in this market when you're is to set their expectations right from the get-go. In other words, this is where in a skill-based market, this is where the professional skilled agents, this is where we shine. And this is why we're able to help represent our customers and do the very best job to help sell their home at the highest possible price or to help them get a contract accepted. So as far as sellers go, I think right from the get-go, if you're a listing agent, you want to talk to your seller about the probability, or at least the possibility, that they're going to have multiple offers. Way of life. But you know what? Even though days on market has increased a little bit, still homes that are priced properly are selling fairly quickly. I think the last month average was 20 days across the market. So that's, less than 3 weeks. So really early on, as you're taking the listing contract and working on, the pictures, you really need to sit down with the sellers and say, okay, let's talk about, what is possible for it to happen in the future here, when we actually start getting a lot of showings and offers. There's a real strong possibility we're going to have multiple offers, and we need to talk about what information that you will approve of me sharing to other agents when they call. And as long as you have confirmation and you want to encourage the seller to allow you to share as much as possible, and to get better offers from those people that are calling. Okay. So can I say that it's fine? I have financed offers and cash offers. Can I say that the seller only wants to consider cash offers? Can I say that the offers that we've had, there's 6 offers we've had, and 5 of them are over the list price. So you just want to confirm with your seller and make them comfortable that by sharing some information that they won't run people off, but rather they will get the best possible offer. So that's important to share that. It's not a bad idea to put it in an email. Say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, thank you for your time today. Here's the things that we've decided when other people call to make offers. How will your seller evaluate the offers? The seller may say, I don't want to look at any offer that's financed. Okay, seller's prerogative. Or I don't want to look at any offers that are below 10% below my list price, that sort of thing. So your seller can start to give you the parameters on how they're going to evaluate the offers, knowing that it's your job as a professional realtor that to present all offers unless the seller has told you otherwise. You want to talk to the seller about backup offers. How do we consider them? What do they mean? And in general, a backup offer is a great asset to a seller because that means that the property is very popular. It also means that the seller has some leverage against the buyer who is in contract with them and kind of dragging their feet, not sure they'll make the deposit. This is leverage for the seller to say to the other agent, hey, look, I just want you to know we have a backup offer and it's a good offer. And so if your buyer should change their mind, or if we have some difficulty where we're exceeding some of our deadlines, I just want you to know that. So it's great leverage and it's a great idea. And what does that mean to the seller? It means the seller doesn't have to put the place back on the market, go through more showings, and so forth and so on. What does it mean to a buyer? Okay, so every week I put out the information about what's happening in the market in the last 7 days. Every month we send out, at the sales meeting, we present the current market stats and our comparison of this year versus last year. And we want to give the buyer the best possible information about what's happening in the market and in that neighborhood. So we're going to be working with them. They're going to be picking properties out that we're sending to them. And then we want to give them information about what's going on in that market. What were the last few sales in that market? How many are active right now? How many are under contract? How many have sold in the last 6 months to a year, and at what price? So the more information I can give the buyer about the neighborhood and the market that they're going to make an offer in, the better their offer is going to be. You also want to prepare your buyer that say, hey, we could put in our very best shot, but we're going to be competing most likely against other offers. And so it's really important. I'm going to call the listing agent, get as much information as I can, and I'll share that with you before we ink the final offer. I want to talk about the terms and conditions. Obviously, price is a big focus, but when we close, maybe a post-closing occupancy, maybe the furniture that we want, but the seller doesn't want anymore. A lot of other things can go on in a contract that have nothing to do with the price. And we want the buyer to be able to understand what a backup offer is and how we might, put our best foot forward by using one. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about multiple offers. I don't see any questions in the chat, so hopefully I'm not putting everybody to sleep. Anyhow, multiple offers are a fact of life. They've been around for a while. They became much more accentuated in the last couple of years. So here's some simple, basic, communicate clear with all parties. Always, always, always call a listing agent before you submit an offer, right? And the seller and you have to be on the same page with what information I can share with all parties about where the offers are coming in, whether they're financed or not, and so forth and so on. And generally, I think you should have a dialogue with the seller that says, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, it's in your best interest that I can give, a reasonable amount of information back to an agent who calls me so that we'll get the best quality offers. All right, so there, when you get into a multiple offer situation, a lot of people say, well, okay, we're going to go back out for highest and best. Meaning I've got 6 offers. I'm going to go back and I'm going to say by Wednesday at 5 p.m., send us your highest and best. Now, there's advantages to that, and that a lot, buyers may sharpen their pencil and say, okay, I know that there's 3 offers that are over, the list price, so maybe I should, maybe increase my offer a little bit. We really like this house. Or the buyer can say, look, I gave him my best shot. I'm not getting in a bidding war. We already put an offer in above list. We already gave the seller a 60-day post-closing. That's our best shot. And then other buyers might say, this is a bidding war. I'm not sure that I want to stay in. I think I'm just gonna, take my offer and move on to something else. I don't like the scenario here. So it's possible when you go to highest and best, and again, it's the decision of your sellers, what they want to do. But if they're asking you what are some of the goods and bads, one of the bads is that somebody's offended because they've already given you their best shot and now you're asking them for more. And they may withdraw from the process. I've seen it happen. I've heard it happening. Sometimes you might lose your best offer by going to highest and best. Remember, if nothing else, in a multiple offer situation, remember the seller is in control. They can accept any offer or no offer. You could have 5 offers, all over list, all cash, all close in 10 days, and the seller can say, I don't like any of these. There is no force to the seller to accept any offer. And sometimes we lose sight of that. I brought you an offer at full price, cash, quick closing, and you turned it down. That's the seller's prerogative. We're not, you're not entitled. You might be able to make an argument in the listing contract that you brought a ready, willing, and able buyer, and they turned it down. However, in this market, a seller may just not like the terms of any offer, may have wanted to, may have countered with or asked for a post-closing. Nobody wants to give it to them. So there may be a reason why a seller turns it down, but the seller, remember, is in control of the process. All you're doing is providing the seller with the information on the offers that are out there, the pros and cons of the offer, and the seller's in control to make decisions. So this is a little multiple offer worksheet that I think a couple of us in the office went on the internet and just scoped out various ones, and we came up with that. And we tweaked the sheet and came up with the modifications here and there. But basically, this is showing you, by the way, if you'd like the sample buyer letter, thank you for your offer, but it wasn't accepted, or you'd like this sample worksheet, just email me, jonesnaples@kw.com, and say, hey, can you please send the multiple offer worksheet or the buyer letter, thanking them for their offer. And I'll be glad to share it with you. I'm happy to do that. But you'll notice on this sheet, we put all the offers together. It's a couple of them dropped out in the process. They found something else. And you can see we kind of went down the list there, what the earnest money was, whether they were asking for any seller concessions, what was the down payment? Was it cash? You know, that sort of thing. So all of these factors come down to a net offer at the bottom here. And that's the buyer in this, excuse me, the seller in this case was an accountant. So they really like this spreadsheet kind of thing. Your seller may say, just give me the basic details. How much are they asking? How much is going to end in my pocket? And that's all I want to know. So, but if you want to put this together as a way of side-by-side comparing all offers, might be a good idea. I think depends on the seller and depends on how they want to evaluate the offers. Okay, so there's other parts of this environment that we'd like to talk about and other things going on, one of which is an escalation clause, but there's some other ideas in here that we can share. Okay, so one of the things that I think is kind of important is if you put a cover letter on top of your offer with a summary of all the key terms. Hello, Kyle. I talked to you earlier. It's Jeff Jones. I'm sending an offer in for Mr. and Mrs. Smith. And I got a summary on there. I just want you to know, I got put everything on one piece of paper. So, you know, there's a number of samples out there, but basically all it is your letterhead with your branding, and you're putting on the total price, you're putting on closing date, you're putting on the inspection period, the financing contingency if it's on there, what's the maximum interest and what's the terms, and you're summarizing on one piece of paper all of the things that are in your contract, so that the listing agent doesn't have to flip through, you know, a dozen or more pages to find out what your offer really is. So I found that will set your offer apart from those that just send the contract in and no comments. So let's say there's 3 offers and they're all fairly similar, and you're the agent and your seller says, do you see any difference between these offers? Oh, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, they're all basically the same. However, you know, when Charles sent his offer in, he put a nice summary on the front, very professional, very well done. And I think maybe he might be a little easier to work with, given that all these offers are very similar. So if you want, you know, just an idea, this might be a good, smooth contract to close because of the way this has been professionally presented. Boom, Charles gets the offer. A couple other people that just sent the contract in with no comment didn't get it. So just saying. Okay, so buyer letters became very popular back in the days, you know, when we first got into COVID and we started seeing people coming down here and wanting really badly to buy. And so they would send it, they would give you a letter to say, hey, send this letter with my offer. And, you know, I just want to personally, you know, say, hi, you know, I went to I went to Stanford University. I see you're a graduate of Stanford. And, you know, my daughter's going there now. And, you know, we really like the area that you live in and we'd be great neighbors and blah, 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 blah. To a certain extent, as long as that doesn't involve any fair housing guidelines, possibly that letter could be give your buyer a little bit of leverage. You know, if it says, you know, we're a nice close-knit family, and, you know, we would make great neighbors and our kids would play with all the other kids on the street and blah, blah, blah. Now you're getting into a familial fair housing situation. I've seen a lot of these letters. You know, one of them said, oh, our son is disabled and he could really use the disabled parking space at the beach and the chairlift. A little shaky, because you're promoting the fact that there's a disability in your family, and that should give you an advantage over other buyers. So that one's a little tenuous. Definitely, if your buyer wants to submit a personal letter with the offer, definitely ask them if you would mind if they take a look at it, if you take a look at it. If there's a bunch of fair housing stuff in there, you got to go back to them and say, you know what? We got to be very careful here by not trying to use a fair housing lever, that may or may, that may unfairly ask the seller for your favoritism, which would be in violation of the fair housing laws. So be careful with that. Many brokers and in some markets around the country do not allow those. To my knowledge, the Southwest Florida MLS and the Southwest Florida markets have no prohibition against these letters. Some brokers don't like them and ask that they not be used. Yours truly says, I'd like to see the letter. I'd like to make sure it doesn't put anybody in an uncomfortable situation. But if it's just, hey, we're a nice family, or this one gentleman said, I graduated from Stanford just like you did, I don't see anything wrong with that. If it will sway, if it was everything else was equal and it could sway it in your favor, okay, but not really. I don't see them too much anymore. When the competition was really stiff and there was really very little on the market, you saw a few of these being written. So we got a whole slide here in a couple minutes on backup offers, but by putting a backup offer in, you're positioning your buyer to be the primary contract holder if the existing contract falls through. And as we see the stats, about 15-16% of them are statistically falling through, but there's a lot of as-is contracts being written where the buyer just wants to take a look. Maybe they haven't seen the property, maybe they want to see what the inspection looks like, but it could play right into your buyer's hands. And it's a great idea for a seller, because what happens when a contract falls through? The buyer doesn't qualify for their mortgage, or there's inspection items that they can't agree on the repairs. So now what am I doing? I'm back to ground zero. I'm back on the market, more open houses, more showings, more offers. And that can be a long, laborious process for a seller who's already gone through the process, for 20 days or 30 days, and now is facing to do it again. Maybe this backup offer that came in that was very close to what the offer they accepted might be an easy way to go for the seller. Okay, so let's talk about escalation clauses. An escalation clause, again, these became popular a couple of years ago when competition, in 2019, we had 7 to 8 months of inventory on average. So we were edging toward a buyer's market, meaning that we had more properties out there for sale than we had buyers to a certain extent. We weren't 10 or 12 months or 39 months like we were right after the crash. But anyhow, that being said, escalation clauses have been around for a while. I haven't seen them too much in this market until a couple of years ago when some of the agents approached me and said, I'd like to use an escalation clause because I use them at, in another market, and they work quite well. And we said, okay. So I got with a lawyer in town, a great lawyer, Sam Sod, and we put together an escalation clause that's approved for use by our agents. It's not in the library, because I want you to call me and say, Jeff, I'm thinking of using an escalation clause, and I want to just make sure that we're all on the same page with what this clause does and what it says. And there's pros and cons to these. In general, the real estate attorneys don't like them because of the ambiguity and the risk, and the fact that an escalation clause could cause a lawsuit. Again, if you use them properly, I don't think so. So what is an escalation clause? Basically, let's say a property's on the market for $550,000, and the buyer says, okay, I'm willing to pay up to $600,000, but I don't want to put an offer in for $600,000 and find out that the next closest offer was $550,000 or $560,000, because now I've paid $40,000 more for this house than the next highest offer. So what I want to do is I want to put an offer in for $550,000, and I want to allow my offer to be compared against any other offer, and I want to be higher than that next offer by $5,000 up to my maximum of 600,000. So my increment is 5,000. I have a basic contract price that I submit the contract for, 550, which is full list. But I'm willing to say, okay, Mr. Seller, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I'm willing to beat the best offer you have by $5,000 up to 600,000. So let's say there's multiple escalation clauses and you have another one that's in there for 550, $5,000 escalations up to 575. Okay. So your buyer will now win at 580 because the next highest offer is 575. I escalate to 580. I win the bid at 580 and I don't pay 600. So the advantage of an escalation clause is the buyer does not have to pay their maximum price. It's all based on increments above the next highest offer. And if the next highest offer is 540, there's no escalation. I win the bid at 550 if that's the seller that selects that offer. Okay. So when you use one, you use it when you feel like you're confident that your primary offer is good, but that you're willing to let the seller know that you're willing to pay more, but not guaranteeing you'll pay that much. So, what can a seller do? A seller could say, well, Jeff, you put your offer in for 600. I'm countering at 600. I don't care about your escalation clause. You said you'd be willing to pay that as a max, and I'm countering at 600. You may or may not take that. So there's pros and cons. As I say, most real estate attorneys don't like them because of the variability that's involved and the uncertainty to the seller, but they have been very successful in our market. I've seen a number of them work quite well. The offers have to be based on an apples to apples comparison. In other words, if there's a credit to the buyer asked for in the contract, and let's say that it's listed at 550, the buyer says, I need $10,000 credit at closing. All right, so that means the net offer is 540. If there's furniture involved, if there's concessions involved, that can affect the value of the net to the seller. And that's what your escalation is mine is based on the net price plus my escalate. It's going to result in a net price, but I have to start with apples to apples. So as I say, we increase our offer from our initial offer in an increment up to a cap. Now, what's the key here is that the seller, if your offer in the case of the 575 and 580 example we just used, if your offer incremented $5,000 over the next highest offer and you won the bid at 580, the seller is required to provide you a bona fide contract, a copy of that bona fide contract. Could they cross out the buyer's names? Possibly, but they can't heavily redact it so that it looks like they wrote it in order to escalate your offer. It has to be a legit offer. It would have to be defendable if there was a challenge to it. So escalation clauses allow you to pay more than the next highest offer, but not necessarily your cap. So here's a copy of the NABOR one. We have a Keller Williams one, which is a little more detailed than that, which I encourage you to use, but this is the one that's in the NABOR library. And notice that there are two areas that the buyer has to complete, and we're asking the buyer to sign the bottom that said, hey, I've consulted with my attorney and my financial advisor. I understand the process and I approve of submitting this as an addendum to my contract. So notice that this offer shall automatically increase by the factor to the highest price, which is my cap. Okay, now in the NABOR contract, if somebody submits an offer with no cap, then this isn't considered a valid clause. I had a situation there in my multiple offer experience where the first buyer that came in said, we're going to buy this house. Here's an escalation clause for $5,000 over any other offer, and there's no cap. And they sent with it This was, let's say, a $400,000 sale. And they said that they would beat any offer by $5,000 with no cap. And I called the realtor back. She was actually a managing broker for an office in Chicago. And I said, I really don't think that's, quite fair to your buyers to just say no cap. Oh, we want the house. We sent you a proof of funds of a retirement account with $1.3 million in it. We want the house. Okay. So lo and behold, here come in 15 offers. A couple of them drop out. But one of the offers said, okay, I've got an escalation clause and I'm willing to increment by 5,000 over the next higher offer up to 450. So now these people have put an offer in at 400 with an escalation clause with no cap. So obviously they were the winning bidder at 455 on a $400,000 house. So fine, I sent them a note. I always reply to the accepted offer before you reject any of the other ones, because you don't know what's going to happen. You expect that they will go along with the terms of that. And it was hard to get a hold of this lady, but finally, later on that day, she said, all my buyers have decided they don't want to pay that much. Okay, so now I have a binding contract with an escalation clause with no cap, and the buyer's agent says, sorry, we're not paying that much. We never intended to pay that much. Okay, so did we have a binding contract, excuse me, with the seller? Could we have gone to a local attorney and said, we want the money? Absolutely. However, would that have taken the house off the market for the time it takes to do legal proceedings and hiring a lawyer? Yes. Okay, so that same offer, that same escalation clause that escalated to 450, turned out the next highest offer was 420, so they went to 425, and my buyer decided, I don't want to fool with all that. I'll take the 425, which was a nice increase over what the original offer was. So the buyers that specified no cap could have, in a legal environment, had to pay that much, and they wouldn't really have had a whole lot of choice because they signed a binding contract. The seller accepted their escalation clause, and they were really on the hook for it. So what's the moral of this story? I don't suggest that you encourage a seller to accept an escalation clause with no cap, just for this reason. Yes, you can, they're legally enforceable, but practically that means taking a home that's very desirable and had 15 offers off the market for quite a period of time. You don't know what that market's going to look like if for some reason the parties decide to settle. They say, look, we'll give you $25,000 to go away. Here you are, just let's settle this thing. Fine, now we're 45, 60 days down the road, and we don't know what the market's going to be like then. So my thought is, suggestion to you is, suggest to your seller that accepting an escalation clause with no cap is not a great idea. And if they use this document, they can't accept it with no cap, all right? Okay, so we're moving right along here. I don't see anything in the chat. Nobody's asked a question, so I'm gonna keep going. So let's talk about backup contracts. What is a backup contract? A backup contract is a fully executed contract accepted by buyer and seller with an addendum on there that says this is a backup contract. We'll talk about the addendum in a minute. But basically, this is an offer from a buyer to a seller to say, look, if your primary contract falls through, we have a deal at these terms and conditions. The seller can sign the backup offer with that addendum saying, okay, I'm accepting your backup offer if the primary offer falls through. And we'll talk a little bit about what some of those conditions are. When do you consider it? Well, the buyer really liked the house. There was 12 offers. They didn't get it. They got a love letter from the agent, from the listing agent saying, hey, gee, thank you, Jeff, for your professionalism. We loved your buyer's contract, but there was one that was, a little bit better. Okay. Then I call back and I say, hey, would you accept a backup offer? And there really isn't a whole lot of downside for a seller to accept a backup offer whose terms and conditions and price are favorable. So then I don't have to go back on the market, no more showings, all this stuff. So I would encourage a buyer to put in a backup offer, and I would encourage a seller to consider it. And if the terms are good, sign it and wait to see what happens. This is a Florida Realtor statistic that was published last week that said about 16.1% of July home contracts fell through, up from 15% in June and up from 12.5% a year earlier. Contracts are falling through, and some 20% or 25% maybe contracts are falling through and going back on the market. What are the pros and cons of a backup? We talked a lot about it. I don't think we need to talk too much more. There aren't a whole lot of cons other than to the buyer, and I'll explain to you why when we look at the backup addendum. So here's a word of caution. You don't ever want your seller to accept multiple backup offers, because they could be selling their house more than once. If let's say the house is on the market for $550, it goes to contract at $575, and now along comes a backup offer for $580. Okay, I'll accept that one. Now 2 days later, another agent calls and says, would you accept a backup offer for $600? Yes, but I need to call my attorney and figure out how all this works, because I can't take two backup offers, because that's two promises to sell the house to another buyer if the first contract falls through. There's nothing in the addendum that says I'm number one, you're number two. That has to be done by a separate agreement that should be signed by all parties, especially if you're number two backup offer. So please don't try to use the backup offer addendum more than once without an attorney looking at it. So when does a backup offer become primary? When the original contract is terminated, the seller then notifies the buyer of the backup contract that they are now primary, and there's a notification in there that states that now the effective date of the contract, of the backup contract, is now the date that the seller notifies the buyer that they're primary, and the seller does not have to close earlier than 30 days after that. So they want time for you to go through your due diligence and for everything to proceed contract to close in not less than 30 days. Because remember, the terms of the backup offer were based on an offer at that time. So obviously the effective date, the closing date, all that has to flow from when the seller officially notifies the buyer that their contract has become primary. So this is the addendum to the NABOR sales contract called backup contract. This must accompany and be signed by all parties in order for the backup contract to be valid. Okay, so the first line is basically the seller identifying that they have a contract with Mr. or Mrs. Smith. And then down there on the next line is when your buyer can take some risk. If the buyer puts a date in there, buyer may terminate this backup contract by giving notice to seller at any time before receiving the primary contract termination notice. If no date is inserted, buyer may terminate this contract at any time prior to receipt of the primary contract termination notice. So if you put a date in there of a week from now, and then tomorrow you find out a much better house, you're still technically on the hook here. If buyer has not received the primary termination notice by X, which might be next Monday, then the buyer can terminate. But if you leave it blank and you find your dream house the next day, fine, you can terminate. But if you put a date in there for the buyer cannot go in under contract with another seller, risking the fact that they may become primary and be buying two houses. So you have to be a little careful with that date. In many cases, the best option is if your buyer has other properties that they're interested in, the best solution is to leave that blank, and then the buyer can terminate at any time. On the other hand, the seller may say, I really need you to give me some time because they're just doing the inspection tomorrow, and I want some time to be able to, accept your backup offer. So remember, the effective date of this backup contract shall be the date buyer's receipt of the primary contract termination notice, okay? Whoops, sorry. And that's the new go date on the contract if the backup offer becomes primary. Buyer may extend the closing date to a date which is not later than 30 days after the new effective date. Okay. So then there's a second one where the seller is notifying the buyer that the seller has a right to make the backup contract primary contract. So this is notification to the buyer that the seller does have the right to make the backup contract primary in terms of the contingency that's specified here. I don't see this used too much, but it is an available addendum. I'll be done in like 10 minutes, okay? I'm teaching. All right, thanks. So I'm just going to summarize here. Again, we've gone through a number of techniques to help you in today's market. Be calm and respectful. Again, you're working to satisfy the best interest of your customer, and you're also working to be professional and cooperative and try to have the best possible outcome. Set the expectations for your buyers and sellers for day one. Don't just jump in the car and go out and start looking for properties, because once your buyer falls in love with the property, then they're expecting, okay, we'll put a contract in and we'll own it. No, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, the market's a little different than that. I want to explain it to you. I want to set your expectations before you head out. Same with the seller. You may get 10 contracts here in 3 days. We're priced right. There's a lot of interest. What are the sellers going to expect? Always communicate. You can't over communicate in this market. Always call the listing agent before you write an offer. Always let the buyer's agents know when their offer wasn't accepted, that it was fairly presented and that it was clearly considered as one of the alternatives. Send them the letter, the buyer's letter, if you like. If you're the listing agent, you're putting in an offer, always consider putting a summary cover letter on there, summarizing the entire offer, and it might set you off as a more professional person to work with if in the event that many of the offers are the same. A buyer letter, if your buyer is insistent on writing a letter, just make sure you check over it. And if there's fair housing stuff in there, you got to be careful that you're not allowing your buyer to ask the seller to discriminate on the basis of fair housing obligations. Use an escalation clause. Again, with your broker approval, if you want to use one, call me. I'll go over the situation with you. One of the other things that we didn't talk about was that increment over the other contract. I've had people send me escalation clauses where the buyer really wants the house and they put 20,000 as their increment. And I like, well, why did you put 20,000? Well, we really want the house. Well, why would your seller or your buyer want to pay 20,000 more than the next higher offer? No reason. Doesn't make your offer any better or worse. So I encourage you to keep the increment in an escalation clause to 1,000, 2,000, maybe 5,000. So that's why it's a good idea, if you're going to use one, to call me. I'll go over the situation with you and we'll decide whether that's the best opportunity to present to your buyer. Use a backup offer. Again, not a whole lot of downside for either side. If there's a lot of competition, offers that were very close, the buyer decided on one, excuse me, the seller decided on one buyer over another, but another buyer could be very interested, and no reason why when you're calling the other or reaching out to the buyers that didn't win to say, hey, we'd be interested in a backup offer if you would be. And remember, you can only accept one at a time. Okay, so that's the end of the presentation. and it's 2:45. So hopefully you learned something. We got some feedback that this is some pretty useful information. If you'd like a copy of these slides, again, you can email me. I'll send them to you. We have people that look at these at night, the replay of this. So again, if you want to go back and look at this over, it's on our YouTube channel. And that's about all I have. Does anybody have any questions or anything they'd like to discuss?
This has been great theory and everything, but is there something like we could set up where we have a situational, like hypothetical contract that we just do manually and we do together and blah, 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 like that?
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, that because I'm more of a do learner than a listen learner, you know,
Okay.
it makes sense.
I'm happy to do that with you one-on-one. Just write up a contract and you'll be I can be the listing agent, or you can be the listing agent, and we'll role play it back and forth. No problem. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, that would be very, very helpful. And for my situation, how my brain works.
No problem.
But this has been gold though, anyway.
Email me and tell me you want to do it, and I'll be glad to do that for you. I'd be able to do that for anybody.
Okay, we'll be able to work something out, I guess, in the next couple of weeks. Cool.
Okay.
Are you going to be in Marco tomorrow?
That offer is good for everybody.
Okay.
All right.
Are you in Marco tomorrow, Jeff?
Wednesday. Tomorrow is we're hosting the
Mega,
the
we have mega tomorrow.
Right. Yeah.
both market centers, but
right.
I think tomorrow is focusing on the mega camp day. But
Okay.
I'll be there Wednesday, I think. Let me know what your schedule is, and I'll make sure to confirm with you.
No, we have mega camp both days. I was just going to say I'll see you there.
It goes to midday Wednesday, so
Okay.
let's try to get to it, whenever it's good for you. All right.
Okay. We'll discuss Wednesday. Thank you. Have a great day today.
We can always set up a Zoom too. We don't have to necessarily be in the same place. All right.
True. All right. All right. Bye, everybody.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great
Bye.
Thank you.